1 of the State Archives. Tell us your name and what you do here.
Hi there, I'm Jeannine Roe. I'm the Electronic Records Specialist for the Indiana State Archives. And my job is to take the electronic records that come in from various agencies and put them in a repository and preserve them.
I guess my first question for you is, why are electronic records important to both state government and to the average Hoosier?
We all work with electronic records constantly. And for the government, what we create here, what we make, are public records. That means the public is allowed access to them. They are for the public. So my job is important because I work with our IT infrastructure here to ensure that we create backups, that everything is held responsibly and cared for responsibly and managed to uphold its integrity. That way, if people are looking for these things in the future, then we can say, here's the document, it is authentic, and here's how we can prove that. So for the public, that matters because if they send out a records request or they're looking for specific topics about specific people, then we can provide them with those things with certainty that they were what they have requested and that they were created as they were intended to be and held as they were intended to be.
Okay, very, very good. I guess a quick follow-up question is specifically what kind of things do you see in terms of the kinds of records you get in the electronic records? Like, what do you see? What kind of things do you get?
Okay, well, I get a wide range of things. So electronic records span everything from audiovisual materials up through email and everything in between. So PDFs, map data, images, lots and lots of images, but also interviews, oral histories, that sort of things. And what I do is a little bit separate from what you see at the state archives, where there is a digital archives, right, where you can go find military records, some birth and death records, things like that. I mostly handle the administrative side of things. So emails that have come in from former governors, the website data that has come in from those and the images associated with that, and things that people maybe don't necessarily associate as archival, but do have historical value.
That's very, very interesting. And so one of the things that we're going to highlight with this particular video is what happens when electronic records go wrong? What happens when you have problems? So my question for you is, are there any examples, and you don't have to name the institution or anything like that, of course. What are some times where you've had issues, and what have you had to do to resolve them?
Well, there are various ways that electronic records can run into challenges. The biggest one right now is format. So you know how much computers have changed over the years, right? So physical formats used to be the way that data was held. 9-track tape, 8-inch floppies, 5 1/4 floppies, things like that. All those distant things, they have a limited lifespan, right? Same thing also for the audiovisual materials. CDs even, they're relatively recent, but they do have a lot of preservation issues. VHS, if you think about it, all of those things that people used to use, not even necessarily all that long ago, are hardware dependent. And then the things that we use now are software dependent, right? So think about the last time you used a computer that was running Windows 95, right? Anything that you're looking at that was created for and ran on Windows 95, if you try to run that on a Windows 2010, you're not going to get anywhere with it, right? Same thing with Mac OS 1 versus a current Mac. Those programs are no longer compatible. So deterioration and obsolescence over time are the biggest factors that we run into for maintaining these things for the longest term. If we're talking about permanent records for the archives, you can keep paper for 500 years if kept in the right conditions. But electronic records, a portable hard drive, even a good one, you'll get 4 to 10 years out of them, many of them far less than that. With the larger service that we utilize here, or that any large institution would use, we replace them every 4 years, and all the data's got to be moved, and we update our software types and all of these things. So there's a huge amount of refreshment and migration that needs to occur, and so money is a big factor of that, but also just making sure that those things can be read in the future. We spend an awful lot of time working on those processes, making sure that the data, all the bits and bytes, gets held together and can move forward into different formats in order to be read on modern machinery.
That's very interesting, because that's one thing that I thought a lot about in preparing to work on this video, was thinking about the ways in which, just even in my own lifetime, how things have changed in terms of the different formats. And so I guess with things that are sort of born digital, whether it's documents or emails or social media, stuff like that, that we would have to preserve as state government. Electronically, what is the best way to preserve those kinds of materials in the long run from your point of view?
I mean, all those formats that you mentioned require something completely different. Social media is a big issue right now, sort of a hot topic, because it's so recent. And for a very long time, email was saved as print to file, right? Even the National Archives, the federal government, would print these emails and send those things to be archived on paper. Well, now what we're looking at is there's so much of it being created. You can't do that with any sort of reasonable expectation. So we hold those electronic records in their native format. So whatever they were created on, and then migrate them to various formats depending on what kind of computer you have to read it. Something similar that happens with social media, but it's even more complicated than that, because while generally in social media, especially that's created and managed by state government or local government, you're only putting out things there that are just kind of informational, right? And you wouldn't think that necessarily you would need to keep them. Today we're having lunch with a group of people. Here's a picture of some folks we met at the local, barbecue that was hosted by our agency, something like that. Those things seem just sort of ephemeral. However, the way social media works is that literally anybody in the world can collect that information. They can comment on that information. So, for instance, a small agency just says something minor, we're at this event, and then all of a sudden, President of the United States shows up at the event. Now, that sounds silly, but that's not necessarily the case. There was a big flood here in Indiana when Reagan was the president, and they were taking pictures of it. The media was out there. They were trying to get it cleaned up, and Ronald Reagan came out of nowhere and dropped in and came to help with the flood. Now, if that was on social media, you would have to archive every single comment that came through with that. And doing that is very complicated. That's not something that you can just print off, because each comment belongs to the commenter. It doesn't belong to the state government, right? So there's a whole process of gathering that data and recording it appropriately so that it is available to the public, but not everything necessarily gets held permanently. So those are the sorts of considerations that we take into place, and it takes time. So, for instance, what that boils down to really is not everything requires permanent retention, and we take time to review those things and only keep permanently what needs to be kept.
Great, and that really, I think that's something, especially going forward with social media, is just something that's going to be so huge that's going to be a problem. To finish up, what would be the one big takeaway that you would want people to know about electronic records and what you do?
One big thing about electronic records that we need to take away.
At least in the context of perhaps this conversation and the importance of records and sort of thinking about your role in serving the public and what we do serving the public as the archives. Where do you fit into that, and sort of what's your big role, and what's your big takeaway for people to know about what you do?
I think the biggest thing that I'm working to do right now is to ensure that the people who are managing the records, the creators of the record, are working toward management on the front end. Everyone's aware that what they're working with is a public record, and then there are certain things that are a non-record. Like a request to come to lunch is not a record, but a request to change a policy, that is a record. Whether it happens on paper or via fax or via email or I don't know, you stick it on microfilm. It's a record, regardless of its format. So making sure that people understand that just because you have a computer and you have a network file and you're dropping all of your stuff into there, that there's more to the management of those electronic records than just simply leaving it there for IT to take care of. There are certain procedures in place for maintaining things for permanent life cycle and for a non-permanent life cycle. A big part of what I do is making sure that there's an awareness of that and that there are workflows in place and policies in place to help people manage that on the front end and then submit the materials to us in an organized fashion that we can then make available to the public via our catalog.
That's great. So it's basically your big thing is making sure that everything is followed by policy within certain parameters to make sure that we can make it as uniform, as preserved, and as accessible as possible.
Certainly.
That's great. Well, thank you, Jeannine. I really appreciate you sitting down with me.
Thank you.
It's going to be great.